Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a realm where reality intertwines with the inexplicable, where the boundaries of reason dissolve into the shadows of uncertainty. Welcome to the political twilight zone. I am your guide through this enigmatic labyrinth, where politics and power take on life of their own. In this dimension, the threads of truth weave a tapestry of intrigue, challenging our perception of the world we thought we knew. In this world, nothing is as it seems, and the truth lies buried beneath layers of deceit. Prepare to venture where reason meets the unexplained, and where the unexplained might just be the world. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us here this weekend. I hope you had a good Memorial Day last weekend. And let's see, did anything happen this week that seemed important? Oh, yeah. Democracy, like the left likes to say all the time, pretty much crashed. Certainly the rule of law did. Other than that, not much, really. Just usual things happening in some of the big cities. I have to tell you, folks, I was even a little surprised. And I am as jaded and pessimistic as I thought I was. So, we have 34 counts guilty on something that, for the life of me, I can't understand what the crime is. And I don't say this from lack of experience. I mean, I've been doing the law thing a long time. And I've been the charging deputy in state prosecution that charged all the cases that came in, felony cases. And I read through this, and I can't figure out what the crime could have been. And I looked at the jury instructions, as you've heard a million times by now. Absolutely, unbelievably, it's just crazy. I mean, I don't understand how they expect anybody to understand them, but I think they just figured that it didn't matter if they understood them or not. They already knew what they were going to do, right? And this calling it a majority on the counts, if 4 people agree on 3 different counts, right? 4 people. I mean, I don't know what to say. I don't know what they're thinking. I really don't. I think that what we're seeing is people who are, they're very stupid. They're blind and they're stupid, and we see what happens now. If I might, by the way, just something that, they always say, it's always a mistake to jump into this. I am going to quote the Bible, because it just occurred to me. Deuteronomy 32, verses 28 and 29. For they are a nation devoid of reason, having no understanding. If they had insight, they would realize this. They would understand their end. Yeah, I mean, I think they are devoid of reason. And I think that that's very dangerous for what happens next. And what I would suggest is that we adopt a attitude of grim resolve. That we're going to have a slog to get this country back on anything like resembles what we thought of 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I mean, I think probably you have to go back before the first Trump administration, because it was off the rails a bit anyway, but then with his election, things just, they flew off the rails, and the train went off the rails and right through the middle of town, and this is what we're doing. I'm also thoughtful about our old friend Tacitus, the great Roman historian, said it is a rare fortune of these days that one may think what one likes and say what one thinks. I think that's becoming a dangerous piece to do anymore, and that's got to get fixed. I will say that several people were discussing on various news channels, maybe this is a Pyrrhic victory. Well, once again, they never really explain what they mean by that. And some of the people that use the term, I'm not 100% sure they know it either. But I'll tell you, Pyrrhus, Pyrrus, I mean, obviously we're translating a Greek name into English language characters. Pyrrhus was a mercenary, and a good one, who had a group of men who were, of course, mercenaries, and were fighting for the tyrant of Syracuse, the ruler of Syracuse at the time. And that was a Greek colony. And at the time they were fighting, who they were fighting was the early Roman Republic. As the early Roman Republic was trying to expand, these guys were, trying to stop it because they had a Greek colony down in Sicily. And so they hired Pyrrhus to come in. And what was happening was Pyrrhus had fought some battles from which he, won the day in the sense that he stayed on the field and the Romans retreated. This was early on in their sort of martial evolution. And someone remarked to him about what a good victory the last one he had. And his quote was, "Yes, and one more such victory, and I am undone." Because what was happening was the Romans were fighting, and they weren't necessarily winning the battlefield, but they were destroying his army. And at some point, he would have no army anymore, and he would have technically held the field and supposedly won the battles, but he wouldn't have anybody to go further with. And so that's what they're talking about. And I think that actually is a fairly apt analogy here, historical analogy, because that is what happens. Occasionally you see that where, we like to say, well, he won the battle, but he lost the war, which is really pretty much the same thing. And I think we're seeing that here now. But yeah, I think grim resolve is about right. Look, we're in real trouble as far as agreements across the board in this country about the underlying fabric of what's important. You know that. And if we're going to get back to it, people have to have some kind of, belief and some kind of support, or whatever you want to call it, in the underpinnings of a constitutional republic. And like I've said many times, I don't think there's really a dispute that two of the largest ones are a faith in the justice system, that it usually is correct, it's usually fair, not always, and that you can trust your elections most of the time. I think there is a significant part of the population, I've said before, that doesn't think that anymore. So if you don't believe that, then what do you believe? What do you hold on to? Well, it's hard to hold on to very much. And remember, this ridiculous idea that we have, and I got an argument with someone about this, about diversity is our strength and all this kinds of things. No. Diverse opinions, when you sort through them and coming up with new ideas, and so, yeah, that's fine. But simply to say that if you have enough different ideas in the room that it somehow makes things better, of course that's not true. And trying to insert all sorts of wild talk and dividing people up by immutable characteristics and then trying to get them angry at each other is not a prescription for really a healthy country. It's not a prescription for getting the country you want. I mean, you may get your leadership back, but I don't think you're going to like what you get back after the time of that. Anyway, so I have to say that a lot of people said this too. I was not surprised, but I couldn't help but be shocked from the Trump verdict. It was pretty crazy. We'll see what happens with the appellate courts. There are so many things in this trial that I can't imagine they aren't reversible error. A reversible error is an error made on the part of the court, most of the time, that is egregious enough to where a reasonable person would think that it affected the outcome. And you, as a defendant, have a right to not have events like that happen in the courtroom that make your opportunity to get a fair trial less available. Anybody that watched any of this or listened to any of this for like an hour, all together, think that isn't happening? That, there's reversible error like around every corner? You don't have to be a lawyer to see this. I mean, would you want to have this judge as deciding anything over you? I mean, the politics aside is the idea that you would bend so much to politics. And some of the rulings and those jury instructions, I don't know what you can draw from them, but it's not like someone bending over to have the scales of justice with their eyes closed. Doesn't look like it to me. Anyway, folks, keep your head up. Hi, folks. Thanks a lot for coming back for the second part of the show here. Quite a week, as we talked about in the first segment. I'm actually a very interested observer. I wish this wasn't in my country, that I was watching another country, but I have to say that it is something that I almost can't wrap my head around because I don't know where it ends up. But you have people who I think, we talked about Pyrrhic victory and stuff in the last time. Well, think about this, because I saved this. The Biden campaign released a statement after this verdict, right? And then, of course, begged for donations. And this is what they said out. Donald Trump has always mistakenly believed he would never face consequences for breaking the law for his own personal gain. But today's verdict does not change the fact that the American people face a simple reality. There is still only one way to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office, at the ballot box. Convicted felon or not, Trump will be the Republican nominee for president. The threat Trump poses to our democracy has never been greater. He is running an increasingly unhinged campaign of revenge and retribution, pledging to be a dictator on day one and calling for our Constitution to be terminated so he can regain and keep power. A second Trump term means chaos, ripping away Americans' freedoms and fomenting political violence, and the American people will reject this in November. Yeah, they always project what they're doing onto us. The part that I thought was really funny, in a sad, funny way, sort of a laughing on the outside, crying on the inside kind of thing, is this whole thing. He's running an increasingly unhinged campaign of revenge and retribution. Really? I mean, how can you look at what's going on right now and say that he's the one doing it? I don't know how that happens. I don't know what kind of bizarre attachment to some sort of alternate reality you have to think that's what's going on. Or to even say it, even if you don't believe it. I think it seems embarrassing to say, doesn't it? It flies in the face of reality. But there is no shame on the other side of this. So that's where they're landed, and that's where they're going to be. July 11th, of course, we'll have a sentencing. Now, you know how this goes is that you have to meet with a probation officer. This will all be very interesting, I have to say. You have to meet with a probation officer. The probation officer, I'm sure it's in New York like it is in most states. Probation officer will then prepare a report based on things about, your job history, what's going on with the case, whether or not you have remorse, you name it. And then as part of that probation report, they provide that to the court, and oftentimes the probation department may make a recommendation about sentencing or so forth. Now, remember, in this case, the sentencing range for these so-called felonies, which, by the way, I cannot figure out what they are. I don't think they're crimes, but anyway, that you could go from a probationary sentence to 4 years in prison. Now, there would be absolutely no precedent for sentencing someone who has never had a criminal history and is 77 years old on a nonviolent crime to prison. I mean, that would be literally unbelievable. I don't think it'll happen. On the other hand, I didn't think a lot of this stuff would happen. So I'm open to be shocked and surprised. But in the meantime on this, there's a lot of things that will happen with the appeal. The appellate court in New York could say that we're going to stay sentencing. We're going to stay the execution of the sentencing. In other words, nothing's going to happen to him until we can review it. But I would be very interested to see what this probation report is going to talk about. People haven't been really latching onto that. Having read a lot of probation reports in my time, it'll be really interesting to see how some probation officer in the New York probation system interviews Donald Trump about his proclivity to reoffend, his background, if he has remorse, and all those sorts of things. I expect it to be another crazy result. I think we have the opportunity here to see this probation report to be the same kind of nut job thing that we saw in this trial. We'll see. Like I said, people who aren't familiar with these probation reports don't realize how bizarre that's going to be. I mean, it's really bizarre. It's unprecedented, right? It's absolutely mind-blowing. But it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I'm interested to understand how they're going to have Trump go to the probation department with his Secret Service, which, for Lord's sakes, he needs in New York, to be interviewed by a probation officer along those lines. I mean, there's a sense of absurdity about that is, it's almost hard to comprehend. I don't think you could make satire out of that. Like we've said before, satire gets to be dead because, what satire is, an overemphasizing things that are really happening to show how ridiculous they are. If they're so ridiculous that are really happening, you can't make satire out of them. I think we're to that point now. It'd be very difficult. Just the idea of it is like, twist your head around and is almost funny. Sad, funny, but almost funny. It's like, are you kidding me? So I'll be interested to see what happens with that. They'll have to do that before the sentencing on July 11th. I expect June to be a very interesting month. I also wonder at what point we're going to hear from Donald Trump about his running mate. If he gets tangled up enough, and maybe it doesn't matter. I mean, they report on him so that he's practically on the campaign trail the whole time he was in trial. But do you guys think that he needs to pick a VP to be out there on his behalf while he's wrestling with this legal system from one point to another? I agree he's done a pretty darn good job of not needing that now, but would it be nice to have another surrogate out there? I kind of feel like it would, but maybe he doesn't want to make that choice until he's closer to the convention. But it's also anybody's guess. I don't know who he's going to choose as vice president, as a running mate. It could be. I don't know who it could be. I have to say that I'm bouncing around on this choice, and maybe you guys are too, because I talk to some people around town and various places. I read what they send to me, and people change their minds back and forth on 2 or 3 people who they think would be good. And there is a lot more people now all of a sudden that thinks that Marco Rubio would be a pretty good candidate. I've sort of fallen into that too. And I mentioned before, I think Marco Rubio has really showed growth and has also shown some steel. And he's unafraid. He's really gone a long way since he was running for president in 2016. And I think he would be a great standard bearer for them. He comes from a family of Cuban refugees. He understands what happens with totalitarianism. He's happy to tell you that. There is a kind of an oddball thing to it because normally the president and vice president can't be from the same state. But Trump has the ability to change his residency since he has residence in more than one spot. So I don't think that would actually be that much of a problem. I don't think DeSantis is someone that's going to be vice president material. I don't think he wants it. I think he's backed off on criticizing Trump. I think that he's a great governor, probably be a great president, but I don't think he fits in. I may be wrong about that. I really like Tim Scott because I see him as a person who, is constantly trying to do the best thing possible for the country. I like Vivek Ramaswamy because I think he's smart. And you don't catch him on the wrong foot when he's talking about something, especially economic news. After that, it starts to get a little hazy for me. I agree. I don't much care for, Kristi Noem as a candidate for vice president. I just think she carries too much weight from other things, and I don't think it works for her. Now there's some dark horses out there, some congressional people and so forth that might show up, but I just wonder if he needs to choose somebody a little earlier so that he has more circuits out there, or if he just doesn't need him. I mean, really, if the press wanted to keep him from being president, they wouldn't cover all this stuff. They don't understand what they're doing. I've walked around and talked to a lot of people that have watched this, and some of which were not big Trump supporters to begin with. And they have become them now. Not because they like his attitude any better than they used to, but they recognize that not supporting him in a situation like this almost amounts to not supporting their own rights. And that this is slowly becoming exactly what he says. It's really, the voters they're after, the Trump voters, and Trump is just in the way and is sort of the effigy that they have for that. So it's going to be very fascinating to watch what happens in the next probably 3 weeks. And you guys out there need to just start really paying attention. It's that time. Well, everybody, back again. Thank you for hanging around. It's not been exactly upbeat today, but I think that there may be reason for us to be upbeat. Sometimes you got to kick the giant pretty hard before he wakes up, particularly if he's been asleep for a long time. That certainly is what's happened here in our country. We have not awakened, to what's going on, and we've fallen prey to that very dangerous disease that runs through civilizations pretty much as far back as we can trace them, is that it can't happen here. Nothing can go wrong here. It's all self-fixing. And we've had a lot of fortunate times in this country where it has. It's managed to fix itself. But it didn't fix itself by itself. Let's go back and look at the 30s, before the Second World War, problems with the Depression, the goofy economic policies of Franklin Roosevelt, the up and down in the stock market after the Depression. It was all over the place, very difficult for people to even anticipate what was going to happen. And because of that, we had a lot of socialism in this country and some outright communism. And labor union movements, some of them were infiltrated by the socialists and some people from the Soviet Union, because destabilizing places was thought to be a good idea in their book. And you can tell that is, by the way, if you look at the history of some of the newspapers and some of the statements from people who wanted us to keep out of the war, people on the far left, who thought that the Soviet Union was the cat's pajamas. But they had all these reasons that, we shouldn't be in there, it's not our fight or anything. But the minute that, we were attacked, of course we declared war after December 7th. But also they became really virulent when the Germans turned on the Russians. Remember, they were their allies in the beginning of the war, and invaded towards Moscow, to Russia. Then all of a sudden, all these people that didn't want anything to do, it's not our business, no. And then all of a sudden it was the most important thing, and we needed to get in there right away. Save old Uncle Joe, right? And so we've had our share of challenges, and within the last 100 years, we don't have to go back much further than that, because if we go back much further, we've got a lot of challenges we can talk about. Anyway, so what I wanted to say was that the world's a funny place right now. I don't know how else to put it. If you look around at what's being said and done places, and I'm not just talking about the United States. We talked a lot about the Trump trial and how the rule of law seems to have, swirled way down the drain, and parts of the country don't seem like the parts of other parts of the country. All of that. Yeah, we've talked about that, but how does it get fixed? And is this next election really perhaps our last chance to fix it without having a real tumultuous time? I would say one thing, that if you're going to fix it at the ballot box, which we should, we got to turn out. And the other thing is, we need to remember that the left is completely solid in their support. I think that's some bickering going on in this snap, but when it comes right down to it, any Democrat is better than any Republican. And they're going to hold on to that. And despite the fact that we're seeing some very good things polling for President Trump, especially after this farce in New York, and it may just get worse, by the way, at sentencing. Like I said, they're going to have to do a probation report and so forth. The least thing they can do with him, essentially, is, a probationary sentence. He'll have a probation officer. There'll be restrictions on him. He could have to, he might have to report in regularly to his probation officer. He might have to submit to drug tests. He might have to, which can you imagine of the two presidential candidates that he would be the one to submit to a drug test? For no apparent reason. These are the kinds of things they can do. They can limit your travel. They can prevent you from owning firearms. And since the effect of a conviction pretty much goes in when the jury verdict is read, in some states he wouldn't be able to vote. So that's what they've done. Now, what a lot of people will be clamoring for is some further order from the judge to stifle his ability to speak out or to go places. And there is a broad range of things, and it could be done. I mean, it's not called for in any way, but I mean, the law would allow it if it still exists anyway. So that makes me wonder about what happens July 11th, because I think this judge, the system in New York, this sort of Macy's Day balloon that they've tied to the ground and made the district attorney in Manhattan, they've pushed the country hard. And they've made it pretty clear, certainly the governor of New York, Hochul, jeez. Oh, what a cretin. Anybody that supports Trump's pretty much a clown. I like Basket of Deplorables better, but, it was a clown to her. So they have really, really pushed it. I don't know how far they would dare to go beyond that. I wish I could have some confidence in it. The statutes and the sentencing guidelines in the state of New York for something like this he's convicted of, even if they didn't stay the inaction of the sentence pending the appeal, and they could do that, by the way, and that's usually what happens. We'll see what happens with President Trump, but is that you immediately become under the jurisdiction of the court in a way that's even more so than you were when you were a defendant. Because now the whole system can be brought against you. And you can have a probation officer that can outline certain things about what you're doing, where you're going, what you're saying, perhaps. I don't think that would be possible. But your probation officer can then write up a request to have your probation revoked or have a hearing about your probation, trot you back in front of Judge Mershon again and say, he's doing this or he's doing that. You can tie somebody up a long ways doing that. They'll have to appear. They're still in the jurisdiction of the court. So campaigning is going to be tough for him no matter how it works out in terms of traveling to different states and so forth. So a lot of it's up to us. He's standing up there for us, really. I mean, look, does he need this job? I mean, look at the two choices we have here with Biden and Trump. Who do you think needs to be in politics to make any money? I think it's pretty obvious. All that's happened to Donald Trump is he's lost money since he's been in politics. And all that's happened to old Joe, who, has never had a real job, not even, I guess, a lifeguard, according to him. Well, if you listen to him, been a truck driver, coal miner, probably a rabbi, I don't know. None of which is true. But he's never had a job. So he needs government to make money. I mean, it's pretty obvious. I mean, if you believe 30% of what comes out of the Hunter Biden interactions with various foreign players, you see it fairly clearly. The hoax they called the laptop is, of course, not. It's been bona fide. It's going to be evidence in court. And if you just study some of those, the emails, this, that, you can't help but come to the conclusion that there's some kind of relationship there where money flows from someone else to Hunter and that somehow just gets trotted off to the big guy. Very difficult not to come to that conclusion. So why does Trump do it? He's a billionaire. You could wander around Mar-a-Lago down there for a week and still not be able to find your way out, probably. He's got a house in Manhattan, although I doubt if he wants to stay at that apartment in Trump Tower very much. He can go anywhere he wants and do anything he wants. He could spend the rest of his life living just as well as he wants to and not have anybody hate him, not having them chase him down. Now, sure, lots of people are going to say out there, oh, well, he's a narcissist. He needs, he wants the attention. He wants this and that. Find me a politician that doesn't want a little attention. If you don't want a little attention, you're really playing in the wrong game. But also, you have to have a need to have something. Now, this isn't like Pritzker or, off the top of my head, I think of 2 or 3 that are billionaires that have bought the governorship in places. Pritzker's in Illinois. And just by the fact that they can overwhelm anybody early on with huge amounts of cash, don't have to wait to raise it. They just write checks out of it, and then, it's hard for you to get anything done as somebody that's out while you're trying to raise money. So it isn't like that. A governor just isn't the same. Doesn't have the same kind of scrutiny, headaches, all this other kind of crazy stuff like the president does. President's a tough job. People who take it age right before your eyes, unless they've already aged out right before your eyes. Or they just don't actually have anything to do, so they don't get any older seeming, I guess. You have that situation as well. But, this is the question to ask. He doesn't have to do this. So we're going to have to help him out. And that means that, and I don't know how many times you've said this. I've said this since, since I think Gore v. Bush, and then, certainly with Obama and, trying to fight some of that stuff. And we talk about how important this election is. It's important, it's important, it's important. Well, we haven't turned out in quite the way that we should have. 2010, we did okay. But now we can't wait. We don't have the luxury of another cycle. I really don't think so. Because there's something else lurking out there, and that is despite the fact that Joe is lower in the polls, there's a lot of Democrat congressional and Senate candidates that are polling better than him. There's a few states that we could win, particularly in the Senate. That would make a huge difference. Because think about what happens. Let's say Joe wins. And then they also, if Joe wins, they, have a majority possibly in the Senate. And Manchin won't be there. So who's going to stop them from changing the rules of the Senate to get rid of the filibuster? So they can just shove things through whenever they want. They won't have enough people to do. We won't have anybody to do it. Because you can change the Senate rules by a vote of the majority. It doesn't take you don't have to have 60 votes to change the rule about having 60 votes. So they would love to do that. And then, if President Trump won again, do you really think any of his judicial appointments would make it through the Senate? We see how this goes. No, it wouldn't happen. I don't know what would happen if he won and they tried to swear him in. Some of the Democrats have said, oh, no, we can't swear him in. He's an insurrectionist, this and that. There's just really nothing off the table with these knotheads. So he's got to show some good support. He's a smart guy, has good advisors. I think he's going to listen to him a little more this time than he did the last time. The first thing he's got to realize, I know he realizes, is that nobody in the District of Columbia who didn't come there with you is particularly on your side. And most of them are really not on your side. All the agency heads, all the mid-level bureaucrats, everybody out there. If you go to some of the areas around Washington, D.C., and look at how many people are employed by the government that live around there, and how that's grown. I mean, the number of government employees is gigantic. I mean, I could look it up, but you guys know. I mean, when we had our jobs numbers, I think 3 months ago, the largest gain in jobs was government and then healthcare. Now, healthcare is important. It's something that happens, but it doesn't really generate or make things. You're not making cars or steel or anything like that. You are paying for it, but it's helpful and it's necessary. Government produces nothing except entertainment, if you're lucky, and problems if you're not. So watching that kind of growth is very disturbing, because what are you doing? You're creating a constituency. People who, even if there's a few of them in there that are kind of, at their basis kind of conservative, they're not going to want to vote somebody that might change their job, cut back their agency, do this and that. Their little fiefdom gets smaller. They're not going to do that. So every one of those people you put in there, you're buying votes, and their family. Right now, the Democrats are trying to put some things through Congress that would change or deepen protections for federal workers from being discharged summarily, because that's a little fail-safe device in case Trump gets in there. They can only let him get rid of people to a certain level based on the idea it's a political appointment. And I think if we've seen, and I've talked a lot about how there's been a targeting down through the Obama administration to hire people at every level. What used to be the professionals, right? Now it's all politics, to get them embedded in there so that they have the protection of the civil service system, and it doesn't really matter who becomes the secretary of who's-its, because these guys are already in there and they'll fix everything so it doesn't run right anyway. And we saw that what happened with the State Department. I mean, it was pretty much arrayed against Donald Trump. So my suggestion, folks, would be the first thing we do is come together locally. Because it's been my experience that when people fight too much about primaries, they get bent out of shape. And because Republicans and conservatives usually have a firm grasp on what they like and what they don't like, they tend to hold on to those things pretty hard. And that's all right. But we can't let that boil over into the next level. Well, those people supported Joe Jones, and then they also support, Bob Cratchit for governor, and I don't like them, so I'm not going to vote for Bob Cratchit either. That's what happens. You guys all know that sometimes. It doesn't take very many people to do that. The Democrats have managed to clean that up pretty well. And, of course, one of the things they've done is they've managed to make people like you and me very much the enemy. We're not just different in our viewpoints. We're dangerous, according to them. This is why we're starting to see this violence all over the place. You cannot do a campaign against a huge swath of the nation telling another parts of the nation that these people are against them, damaging them, preventing them from doing things, harming them in really in a physical way almost. And you start adopting things like, words are weapons, and this, before you know it, you have jacked the whole situation up to where these people are no longer even political opponents. They're enemies, and not even internal enemies. And we're really kind of at that if you see what's going on. If you saw what was going on in New York around this trial between some Trump supporters and some of the folks that showed up that wanted him convicted. I mean, some of the Trump supporters, I have to say, were a little out of line, but they did a good job. But the left, if you look at the signs and stuff, I mean, they're mean. Just mean to about everything. Gives you some idea of what you're up against. And if you reflect any of that back, well, then you're a terrorist or a domestic something or other that needs to be watched by the FBI. And you shouldn't have to anyway. Because the way we make change here still is at the ballot box. And they're having trouble gaming the system at the ballot box this time like they did in 2020. Now, they're still going to do all the vote harvesting and this and that. And, I heard Trey Gowdy on Fox News say something that I think is really good to think about. He said, we talk about Election Day, November 5th. He said, the Democrats don't think about that. They think about elections starting in September. Because that's when all this balloting starts in a lot of these states. And that's true. I think that's a good observation. So we've got to get our act together before then. Are we going to have to adopt some of the same style of vote gathering and this and that we don't really like? Yeah, because we can't be overwhelmed by their ground game, as I always like to say. So as we come to our own primaries here in Colorado and wherever some of you guys at, if you still have primaries in your states, fight for your candidate, but don't fight after the candidate if they lose. Don't fight with those people. Don't let it become personal as far as a conservative with other conservatives or people who you think are weak-kneed conservatives, because we need everybody. It's very easy to see a scenario where the left could retain control of the Senate and take back the House. I mean, the House is, it's just dancing on a tiny little tightrope. So that could happen. And even if we got President Trump into office, his ability to act would be so severely constrained. I mean, the media would be bad enough. So because of that, let's really think about how we approach our primaries. Work hard for your candidate, believe in them, do everything you can for them, get out. It's a good way to get started and just keep going until the general election. But don't let any rancor influence the rest of what you do, because it won't help you and will only hurt the country. We'll be back.
Hi, folks. Thanks for listening.
Take care of yourself, folks.
Listen, if you'd like to listen to more and you want to maybe perhaps have someone else listen to our podcast, you can do so either by going right to our webpage, politicalviking.com, or therickWagnerShow.com. Both of them will take you there. You can get links right directly to our podcast, or you can hear our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, and Spotify, and a couple others. So you can find us. We appreciate it if you do. And if you've heard the show, you want somebody else to hear it, that's a good way to send it to them. Thanks for listening.